Due to the success of a recent video, I've already hit 3,000 subscribers, so to celebrate, I'm going to do another Q&A style video. My last few videos have all been about Jaco Pastorius. I've had lots of interesting comments, so I thought we'd go over some of them for this video. So there's been a lot of music theory comments, particularly on the subject of dominant 13th chords, so if you're not really interested in music theory, go to this time. On my Teen Sound video, I discussed the topic of dominant 13th chords, and there's a lot of confusion around this topic. So I'm going to address some of that, but first, what is a 13th chord? So you can create a 13th chord by stacking thirds. So let's use the key of C as an example. We have these notes, C, D, E, F, G, A, B. We will label them root, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th and 7th. Going higher in pitch, we get the next octave, and we're going to label these 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. To create a basic C major triad, we just need the root, the 3rd and the 5th. So the pattern here is to take a note, skip a note, take a note, skip a note, also known as stacking thirds. If we continue this process, we take root, 3rd, 5th and 7th. This gets us the C major 7th. So if we keep going, we go on to the next octave and we would take root, 3rd, 5th, 7th and 9th. 9th is the same as the 2nd, but just one octave higher. This is called a compound interval. That chord is a major 9. The next one is root, 3rd, 5th, 7th, 9th, 11th. This is the major 11. We can actually do this one more time. That's root, 3rd, 5th, 7th, 9th, 11th and 13th. This is the major 13th chord. If we lower the 7th by a semitone, we have the dominant 13th chord. Theoretically, this is how you arrive at a dominant 13th chord. But in practice, it doesn't sound that great. Have a listen. So we'd usually get rid of the 11th and the 5th. You can also lose the 9th. In fact, the least you need is the root, the 3rd, the flat 7 and the 13th to still call it a dominant 13th chord. Guitarists commonly play this voicing, which is just the root, 3rd, flat 7th and 13th. So the 11th can be in this chord, but it isn't voiced that way very often. The voicing in the track Teen Town is the 3rd, flat 7th, 9th and 13th. So the 5th and the 11th are omitted. The reason musicians will often omit these notes is because a chord with 7 notes, such as the C dominant 13, has 21 different intervallic factors, which is a bit much on the ear. So by removing 2 or 3 of these notes, you drastically reduce the amount of intervallic relationships. Therefore, it's much easier on the ear. In particular, the 3rd and the 11th create a sharp dissonance, so removing the 11th takes away that sharp dissonance. So there were quite a few comments saying the dominant 13th does not include the 11th, but as we've learned, it can, but it often doesn't. At one point in the video, I list all the possible chord tones from each of the 4 dominant 13th chords. I only do this to justify my analysis that each chord is its own key center. I think that's where some people stop watching, because immediately after that, I do say the 11th is omitted. If you improvise over these changes, then you could choose to use all the notes of this full dominant 13th chord. It's all the same notes of the Mixolydian scale. You can avoid the 4th 11th if you want. So if you analyze the bass line melody on Teen Town, it does play the 4th on a number of occasions, usually more as a passing note. It never resolves to the 4th/11th, but it is in there nonetheless. This was just a way of me trying to justify why I think it's got 4 key centers. I wasn't discussing the voicings at this point, that came slightly after. A few of those commenters may have clicked off before I got to that point. So let's look at some of these comments. Dude, the 11th in the 13th chord is a sharp 11, so the F sharp is implied / contained, not the F natural. Please don't present something this misinformed! A little bit vitriolic there at the end, but unfortunately this is incorrect. So you can have a dominant 13th chord with a sharp 11, but you would probably name it a dominant 13 sharp 11. I think what's happened here is you've confused major 13th chords with dominant 13th chords. Adding a sharp 11 to a major 13th chord is much more common, but it's not what's happening in Teen Town. Strictly speaking, a 13th chord doesn't contain the 11th, otherwise it gets called a sus13. So you would only call it a sus chord or a suspended chord if the 3rd wasn't involved. A dominant 13 has a 3rd, so it's not a suspended chord. So here are my sources. This is my music theory gradebook from many years ago. We've got the 13th chord here with all the notes including the 11th. It does explain down here at the bottom that the 11th is not usually included. This is an RBRSM book. Here we have the chord with all its notes, and then at the end here, one with just the important notes. Okay, this is my personal favourite. This is 20th Century Harmony by Vincent Persichetti. Here we have the C dominant 13 with all its notes including the 11th, and it goes on to explain the 11th doesn't need to be included. Okay, let's move on from 13th chords. Here are some other comments. Just because it's played on the bass guitar does not mean it's a bass line. So you're referring to my title, this bass line is unsettling. You actually raise a really interesting question there. What exactly is a bass line? Let's Google it. It's a line played by a low-pitched instrument such as an electric bass, double bass, cello, tuba, or keyboard. So going off this comment, it is a bass line, but I think what you're getting at here is that it's acting more like a melody than a bass line. Maybe we should call it a bass melody. We'll meet halfway. So here's some comments that I've grouped together. Pastorius is an acquired taste, and after over 40 years of hearing him, I still haven't acquired it. Technique, but no music. It might be interesting in terms of harmony and complexity, but in my opinion, it has less to do with the role of the bass within the music. Too many notes to play without any groove, structure, or feeling. So there were a fair few comments like this. I never really realised how polarising Jaco Pastorius was. I guess I've been living in a bit of a bubble. But I think it's okay to have that opinion. Some people never warm to it. Some people like me don't get it at first, but then gradually find an appreciation for it. And then there are people like this. It's not weird to those who grew up with this style of music. It's always sounded fine to me from day one. I think it sounds nice. So a fair few comments like this as well. People who said that they have always found it nice to listen to. I find it fascinating that some people experience dissonance this way. But I guess if you grow up listening to jazz fusion, experimental music, or the avant-garde, you'll experience dissonance in a different way from someone who just grows up listening to pop music. So a lot of people in that first video are saying that Jaco had no groove and it was all music theory and technique. So I created a second video to try and show some of his groovier side. I called that video, Could Jaco Groove? Here are some comments. Is the Pope Catholic? I mean, what a silly question. I said Jaco was the grooviest player in the world on your video, and thanks for proving me right. Saying that Jaco can't groove is like saying Marcus Miller can't do slap. Saying Jaco can't groove is delusional. So again, a lot of polarization there on whether he can groove or not. Some people think it's a silly question to even ask if he can. Some people don't think he can at all. So this is from my Portrait of Tracy video. When I listen to this masterpiece, as you rightly name it, I can't help but think of Jaco in his room creating this, and I wonder if he knew how revolutionary his work would become. Thanks for taking the time to do this. I know I often think the same thing. I often wonder how something so groundbreaking can pop into existence. I'd love to know the process behind it. I heard he was real arrogant. He may have been. There is that famous story of when he met Joe Sabanel for the first time, and he told him that he was the greatest bass player who ever lived. Awesome video, and a surprise to see my face pop up midway through. Thanks a lot. It was a real honor to receive a comment from Mark at Talking Bass. Thanks very much, Mark. He's one of the YouTube bass OGs, so obviously a big inspiration to this channel. Hey, I certainly wouldn't complain if it was a bit longer. Great video. Thank you very much for the kind words. I'd love to make longer videos. My average is about 5 minutes, just because I'm working on a really old MacBook. It really struggles when the project gets too big, but hopefully in the future I'll get something that can handle larger projects. Get your Jaco phase over with quick. It'll get you fired in a hurry. Well, I guess that depends on the gig, but you kind of got a point there. Most people aren't looking for a bass player like Jaco Pastorius to be in their band. However, I do think we need more innovators out there in the bass world. I think if you're going to take anything from Jaco, it's just his will to push music forward. I think that's the biggest influence you can take. So Wolfpack didn't write Deantown. What? Deantown was written by Wolfpack, but it was a homage to Teentown. I believe Jaco played the drums on Teentown separately, which is what Wolfpack also did, and of course was the 16th note bass line or bass melody. I live in South Florida and I recorded with Jaco on 3 records. He was intense and he did not like playing long phrases like Spain or Tintown. But the jazz world at that time only respected people that could play long phrases. Today he is still the best bass player of all time. I really enjoyed that comment. It was a really nice insight, so thank you very much for sharing. And I think that's a nice way to end this video. So if you subscribed, thanks very much. If you haven't, consider doing so. Thank you very much.